The November wind cut through Lancaster County like a blade, carrying with it the promise of an early winter. Samuel Miller pulled his black wool coat tighter as he guided his plough horse, Moses, across the frozen furrows of his cornfield. At 40, Samuel's hands were weathered from decades of farming, his beard now streaked with silver threads that caught the pale morning light. 3 years. 3 years since the accident that took his beloved wife Mary and their sweet daughter Rebecca. 3 years since laughter had echoed through the rooms of his farmhouse. 3 years since he'd felt truly alive. The rhythmic clop of Moses's hooves and the scrape of the plough were the only sounds breaking the morning silence. Samuel preferred it this way. The solitude matched the emptiness that had taken residence in his chest. He'd grown accustomed to the pitying glances from neighbors, the well-meaning invitations to Sunday dinners he always declined, and the gentle suggestions from the church elders that perhaps it was time to consider remarrying. But Samuel wasn't ready. He wasn't sure he'd ever be ready. As he reached the edge of his property, where his land bordered the old county road, a sound made him pause. It wasn't the usual clip-clop of horse hooves or the rumble of a passing buggy. It was something else, a rhythmic dragging sound, punctuated by what sounded like labored breathing. Samuel pulled Moses to a stop and listened more carefully. There it was again. Drag, pause, drag, pause. Curious, he walked Moses closer to the wooden fence that separated his field from the road. What he saw made his heart skip a beat. A small figure was making its way slowly down the dirt road, bent nearly in half, with effort. As Samuel's eyes focused, he realized it was a child, a little girl, maybe 10 years old, with long dark hair that had escaped from beneath a thin patched headscarf. She was dragging what appeared to be several large pieces of split wood, pieces so heavy that she could only move them a few feet at a time before stopping to catch her breath. The girl wore a dress that had seen better days, faded blue fabric with patches sewn carefully over holes and boots that were clearly too big for her small feet. With each step, the oversized boots made her gait unsteady, causing her to stumble as she fought to maintain her grip on the wood. Samuel found himself moving closer to the fence, his farming forgotten. The girl couldn't have weighed more than 70 pounds soaking wet, yet she was attempting to move pieces of oak that Samuel himself would have struggled to lift. Her thin arms trembled with the effort, and even from a distance he could see that her face was flushed red from exertion and cold. Drag, pause, breathe heavily, drag, pause. She'd managed to move the wood perhaps 20 feet down the road in the time Samuel had been watching. At this rate, wherever she was trying to go, it would take her hours to get there. The temperature was dropping, and those thin clothes wouldn't provide much protection against the bitter wind that was picking up. Samuel's first instinct was to help, but he hesitated. In recent years, he'd become more withdrawn from the world beyond his farm. The grief had made him cautious about getting involved in other people's troubles. He had enough of his own. But as he watched the little girl pause again, her small shoulders rising and falling with each labored breath, something stirred in his chest, something he hadn't felt in a very long time. The girl attempted to lift the wood again, but this time her grip slipped, the heavy pieces tumbled to the ground, and she fell backward, landing hard on the frozen dirt road. For a moment she just sat there, and Samuel could see her small body shaking, whether from cold, exhaustion, or tears. He couldn't tell. That was enough. Samuel tied Moses's reins to the fence post and climbed over the wooden barrier. His boots crunched on the frost-covered grass as he approached the road. The little girl looked up at him with wide, startled eyes, the deepest brown eyes he'd ever seen, framed by dark lashes wet with unshed tears. For a moment Samuel was struck speechless. Something about those eyes, the shape of her face, the way she held herself despite her obvious distress, reminded him so strongly of his Rebecca that his breath caught in his throat. "Are you hurt, child?" Samuel asked gently, his voice barely above a whisper. The girl quickly wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and shook her head, but Samuel could see the slight wince as she shifted her weight. She'd definitely bruised something in the fall. "I'm fine, mister," she said, her voice small but determined. I just need to get this wood home." Samuel knelt down beside her, careful not to get too close. He didn't want to frighten her. Up close, he could see that she was even thinner than he'd initially thought. Her cheekbones were sharp, her wrists narrow as twigs. When had she last had a proper meal? "Where is home?" Samuel asked. The girl pointed down the road, toward the old Henderson place, a property that had been abandoned for years. Samuel's brow furrowed. Nobody had lived there since old Henderson died 5 summers ago. The place had fallen into disrepair, with broken windows and a roof that leaked like a sieve. "The Henderson place?" Samuel asked, confused. The girl nodded, then seemed to realize she'd said too much. She quickly scrambled to her feet, wincing again as her weight settled on what was clearly a bruised hip. "I have to go," she said, reaching for the wood again. "They'll be wondering where I am." "Wait," Samuel said, standing slowly. "These pieces are too heavy for you. Let me help." "No." The girl's response was quick and sharp, almost panicked. "I mean, no thank you, sir. I can manage." But even as she said it, her small hands were trembling as she tried to grip the wood. Samuel noticed something else. Her knuckles were scraped and bleeding, probably from previous falls. "Child, what's your name?" Samuel asked gently. She hesitated, as if debating whether to answer. Finally, she whispered, "Emma." "Emma," Samuel repeated, and the name felt familiar on his tongue somehow. "I'm Samuel Miller. I live just over there." He gestured toward his farmhouse, visible in the distance. Emma glanced toward his property, then back at the wood on the ground. Her lower lip trembled slightly. "Emma, nobody should have to carry such heavy loads alone," Samuel said carefully. "Especially not a young girl like yourself. Where are your parents? Your family?" At the mention of family, Emma's entire demeanor changed. Her small face crumpled for just a moment before she forced herself to stand straighter, chin raised in defiance of whatever was making her so afraid. "I have to do this myself," she said, her voice barely audible. "Please, just please leave me alone." But Samuel couldn't leave her alone. Not when every instinct he had was screaming that this child was in trouble. Not when she looked so much like Rebecca that it made his heart ache. And not when she was clearly struggling with something far heavier than the wood she was trying to drag. As Emma bent to try lifting the wood again, Samuel noticed something that made his blood run cold. Peeking out from beneath the sleeve of her patched dress, he could see what looked like fingerprint-shaped bruises on her upper arm. "Emma," Samuel said, his voice more urgent now, "who gave you these bruises?" Emma's eyes went wide with fear, and she quickly pulled her sleeve down to cover the marks. "I fell," she said quickly. "I'm clumsy. I fall a lot." Samuel's jaw tightened. He'd seen enough in his 40 years to recognize the sign. The fear in her eyes, the desperate need to complete this impossible task, the way she flinched when he moved too quickly. Emma was afraid of someone who was making her drag heavy wood in the bitter cold, someone who was hurting her. "Emma," Samuel said, kneeling down to her eye level again. "Are you safe at home?" The question hung in the cold air between them. Emma's brown eyes filled with tears she was fighting hard not to shed. For a long moment she just stared at him, and Samuel could see the war raging inside her, the desperate need to ask for help battling against whatever fear was keeping her silent. Finally she whispered, "I have to get this wood home." She stopped, pressing her lips together as if she'd said too much. "Or what, Emma?" She shook her head frantically. Nothing. I have to go." This time when she reached for the wood, Samuel gently untied her hands. "No more," he said firmly. "I'm going to help you get this wood where it needs to go, and then you and I are going to have a proper conversation about what's happening to you." "You don't understand," Emma said, tears finally spilling over. "If I don't bring back enough wood, if I'm too slow, he gets angry. Really angry. And when he gets angry..." She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Samuel's heart was racing now, anger and protective instinct warring in his chest. "Who gets angry, Emma? Who's hurting you?" But Emma was already shaking her head, backing away from him. I can't tell you. You'll just make everything worse." Samuel stood slowly, his mind racing. This child was clearly being abused, but she was too afraid to ask for help. If he pushed too hard, she might run, and then he'd lose any chance of helping her. But if he let her go back to whoever was waiting for her, what would happen to her? As he struggled with what to do next, Emma made the decision for him. She turned and ran, abandoning the wood entirely, her oversized boots making her stumble as she fled down the road toward the old Henderson place. Samuel watched her go, his heart breaking for the terrified little girl who reminded him so much of his own lost daughter. But as Emma's small figure disappeared around a bend in the road, Samuel made a decision that would change both their lives forever. He wasn't going to let this go. Whatever was happening to Emma, whoever was hurting her, Samuel was going to find out. And when he did, he was going to stop it. Even if it meant breaking every rule his Amish community lived by. Even if it meant risking everything he had left. Because sometimes, doing what's right matters more than doing what's expected. And Emma deserved someone who would fight for her. Samuel stood in the cold road for several minutes after Emma disappeared, staring at the abandoned pieces of wood scattered on the frozen ground. The wind had picked up, sending dried leaves skittering across the dirt path, but he barely noticed. His mind was consumed with images of frightened brown eyes and bruised arms, of a little girl so desperate and afraid that she'd rather struggle alone than accept help. Finally, he gathered up the heavy oak pieces, 6 of them, each weighing at least 30 pounds. As he loaded them into his arms, Samuel marveled at the fact that Emma had been attempting to move them at all. The wood was seasoned oak, the kind used for heating during the harsh Pennsylvania winter. Each piece would have been a struggle for a grown man to carry. For a 70-pound girl, it should have been impossible. But desperation, Samuel knew, could make people attempt impossible things. He loaded the wood into his farm wagon and hitched Moses to it. If Emma wouldn't let him help her directly, he could at least make sure she didn't have to come back for the wood later. As he guided Moses down the county road toward the Henderson place, Samuel's mind wandered back 3 years to another November day. Rebecca had been Emma's age when the accident happened. 10 years old, with the same determined spirit that he'd seen in Emma's eyes, Rebecca had insisted on helping him repair the barn roof that day, despite Mary's protests that it was too dangerous for a child. Samuel had given in. He'd always had trouble saying no to his daughter's bright smile and earnest pleas. The ladder had given way without warning. Both Samuel and Rebecca had fallen, but while Samuel had landed in a pile of hay, Rebecca had struck her head on the stone foundation. She died 3 days later, and Mary, overcome with grief and blame, had followed her daughter just 2 weeks after that, her heart simply stopping in her sleep. The doctor said, though Samuel knew she'd died of a broken heart. The guilt had nearly destroyed him. If he'd been firmer with Rebecca, if he'd insisted she stay on the ground, if he'd checked the ladder more carefully, the what-ifs had haunted him for 3 years, driving him into the solitude that had become his refuge. But now, seeing Emma's plight, Samuel felt something awakening in him that had been dormant since the accident. The protective instinct that had made him a devoted father was stirring to life again, focused now on a little girl who desperately needed someone to care about her welfare. As Samuel approached the Henderson place, his heart sank. The property looked even worse than he'd remembered. The farmhouse, once a proud 2-story structure, was now a skeleton of its former self. Several windows were boarded up with mismatched pieces of plywood. Others were covered with plastic sheeting that flapped in the wind. The front porch sagged dangerously, and part of the roof had collapsed entirely, leaving a gaping hole that was poorly covered with a blue tarp. But what troubled Samuel most were the signs that someone was indeed living there. Smoke was rising from the chimney, though it was a thin, weak stream that suggested they were burning whatever they could find, rather than proper firewood. A few pieces of laundry hung on a makeshift clothesline, and Samuel could see the faint glow of lamplight through one of the intact windows. Samuel pulled his wagon to a stop at the end of the long, overgrown driveway. He didn't want to get too close to the house, not yet. He needed to understand the situation better before confronting whoever was inside. As he sat there trying to decide his next move, the front door of the farmhouse opened. A man emerged, and Samuel's blood ran cold. The man was tall and gaunt, with unkempt hair and clothes that looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks. But it wasn't his appearance that alarmed Samuel. It was the way he moved. There was something predatory about his posture, something aggressive in the way he scanned the property as if searching for trouble. "Emma," the man shouted, his voice carrying clearly across the cold air. "Where the hell are you, girl?" Samuel heard a door slam somewhere around the back of the house, and moments later, Emma appeared, running toward the man, with obvious fear in her movements. "I'm sorry, Uncle Dale," Emma called out as she approached. "I was just what?" The man, Uncle Dale, grabbed Emma roughly by the arm, the same arm Samuel had seen bruised earlier. Emma winced, but didn't cry out. "Where's that wood I sent you for? You've been gone for hours." "It was heavy," Emma said, her voice so small Samuel had to strain to hear it. "I dropped it, and dropped it." Dale's voice rose to a near shout. "You useless little—" He raised his hand, and Samuel's entire body tensed. Every instinct told him to jump from the wagon and intervene, but he forced himself to stay put. If he revealed himself now, before understanding the full situation, he might make things worse for Emma. But watching this man threaten a child was taking every ounce of Samuel's self-control. "Please, Uncle Dale," Emma said, stepping backward. "I can go get it. I know where I left it." "You bet you can go get it," Dale snarled. "And this time, if you don't bring every piece back, you'll be sleeping outside tonight. You understand me?" Emma nodded quickly, tears streaming down her face. "And next time you're gone that long, I'm coming to find you," Dale continued. "And you won't like what happens when I do." With that, he shoved Emma away from him. She stumbled but managed to keep her feet. Without another word, Dale turned and went back into the house, slamming the door behind him. Emma stood alone in the yard for a moment, her small shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Then, squaring her shoulders in that same determined gesture Samuel had seen earlier, she started walking back toward the road. Samuel waited until she was closer before calling out softly, "Emma." She spun around, eyes wide with terror at being discovered near her home. "It's all right," Samuel said quickly, climbing down from his wagon. "I brought your wood." Emma looked at the loaded wagon, then back toward the house, panic clear on her face. "You can't be here," she whispered urgently. "If he sees you, is that man your uncle?" Samuel asked, keeping his voice low. Emma nodded reluctantly. "Uncle Dale, he's taking care of me." The way she said "taking care of" made Samuel's jaw clench. "What happened to your parents, Emma?" Fresh tears welled up in her eyes. "Mama died last spring. She got sick, and we couldn't afford the doctor, and she got worse and worse until—" Emma's voice broke. "What about your father?" "I never knew him," Emma said, wiping her eyes. "Mama said he left before I was born. Uncle Dale is Mama's brother. He's the only family I have left." Samuel felt his heart breaking for this little girl, orphaned, scared, and trapped with a man who clearly had no business caring for a child. "Emma, has your uncle ever hurt you before?" She looked toward the house nervously, then back at Samuel. "He just gets frustrated sometimes. Taking care of me is hard for him. He didn't ask for this responsibility." She was making excuses for him, Samuel realized, protecting the very person who was hurting her. It was a pattern he'd seen before in his community. People, especially children, often defended those who hurt them because they feared the alternative even more. "Emma, no child should have to live in fear," Samuel said gently. "There are people who can help." "No." Emma's response was immediate and panicked. "You can't tell anyone. If the authorities come, they'll take me away and put me in one of those horrible places. At least here I have a roof over my head. Uncle Dale says if anyone finds out how we're living, they'll separate us and I'll end up in some institution where nobody will ever care about me. Samuel realized that Dale had been manipulating Emma's fears, convincing her that staying with him, no matter how badly he treated her, was better than the alternative. That's not true, Emma. There are good families who— Please, Emma interrupted, her voice desperate. Just give me the wood and forget you ever saw me. I can handle Uncle Dale. I just have to be more careful, work harder. Maybe if I can find some way to earn money, help with expenses, he won't be so angry all the time. Samuel looked at this brave, broken little girl and his heart made a decision his mind was still catching up to. Emma, what if there was another way? What do you mean? Samuel took a deep breath. What he was about to suggest would shock his Amish community and possibly bring serious consequences. But looking at Emma's frightened face, he knew he couldn't walk away. What if you didn't have to go back in there tonight? What if you had somewhere safe to stay? Emma's eyes widened. I can't leave Uncle Dale. He's family. And besides, where would I go? Samuel gestured toward his farmhouse, visible in the distance across the fields. You could stay with me. The words hung in the cold air between them. Emma stared at him as if he'd spoken in a foreign language. I don't understand, she whispered. My farmhouse has empty rooms, Samuel said, the plan forming as he spoke. You could have a warm bed, regular meals, safety. In return, maybe you could help me with some light chores around the farm. Nothing too heavy, he added quickly, thinking of the wood she'd been struggling with. But you don't even know me, Emma said, confusion clear in her voice. Samuel smiled sadly. No, but I know what it's like to lose everything. And I know what it's like to be alone. From inside the house they heard Dale's voice again, shouting something they couldn't make out. Emma flinched at the sound. I have to go, she said. He'll be mad if I don't come back soon. Emma, wait. Samuel reached into his wagon and pulled out all 6 pieces of wood. Take these, but promise me something. What? If things get bad, I mean really bad, you come to my farm. Day or night, it doesn't matter. Promise me. Emma stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether she could trust this strange Amish man who'd appeared out of nowhere offering help. Why would you want to help me? She asked. Samuel's throat tightened. Because everyone deserves someone who cares about their well-being. And because, he paused, struggling with emotions he'd kept buried for 3 years. Because you remind me of someone very special who isn't here anymore. Something in his voice must have convinced Emma, because she nodded slowly. I promise, she whispered. Good. Samuel began loading the wood pieces near the end of the driveway where Emma could easily carry them to the house one at a time. And Emma, this conversation stays between us. She said it again, then surprised him by reaching out and touching his hand briefly. Thank you, she whispered. Nobody's been kind to me in a very long time. With that, she gathered up the first piece of wood and headed toward the house, leaving Samuel standing by his wagon with tears in his eyes and a determination in his heart that he hadn't felt in years. As he drove home, Samuel knew his life had just changed forever. He'd made a promise to a little girl who needed a guardian angel, and he intended to keep it, even if it meant defying every tradition his community held dear, even if it meant risking everything. Because some promises were too important to break. Samuel barely slept that night. Every creak of his old farmhouse, every gust of wind against the windows, had him wondering if Emma was safe. He found himself getting up repeatedly to look out toward the Henderson place, though it was too far away to see anything in the darkness. At 4 a.m., he gave up on sleep entirely and made his way to the kitchen. The house felt especially empty in the pre-dawn hours, filled with memories of Mary humming as she prepared breakfast and Rebecca's sleepy chatter before school. Samuel made coffee and sat at the kitchen table where his family had once gathered every morning, staring out the window as the first pale hints of dawn crept across the sky. He was questioning his sanity. What had possessed him to offer shelter to a child he'd just met? His Amish community had strict protocols for dealing with situations like Emma's. They would involve the church elders, who would contact the proper English authorities. There were systems in place, procedures to follow. But Samuel had seen the terror in Emma's eyes when she'd begged him not to tell anyone. He'd heard the desperation in her voice when she'd spoken about being taken away, and he'd witnessed firsthand the casual cruelty of the man who was supposed to be protecting her. Systems and procedures were fine in theory, but they moved slowly, and Emma needed help now. As the sun finally rose, Samuel made a decision. He would give Emma one more day to see if she would come to him on her own. If she didn't, he would find a way to check on her welfare without making the situation worse. But first, he needed to prepare for the possibility that she might actually take him up on his offer. Samuel spent the morning cleaning out Rebecca's old room. For 3 years, he'd kept it exactly as it had been the day she died. Her books still on the shelf, her clothes still in the drawers, her favorite rag doll still sitting on the bed. Mary had been the one to maintain the room in those final weeks before her own death. And after she was gone, Samuel had simply closed the door and tried to pretend the room didn't exist. Now, as he dusted the furniture and opened the windows to let in fresh air, Samuel felt both heartbreak and hope warring in his chest. It felt like a betrayal of Rebecca's memory to prepare the room for another child, but at the same time, he knew his daughter would have wanted him to help Emma. Rebecca had always been drawn to stray animals and lost causes. She'd brought home injured birds, befriended the shy children at school, and once spent her entire savings on food for a neighbor's family who'd fallen on hard times. She'd inherited Mary's compassionate heart and Samuel's stubborn determination to help those in need. Yes, Rebecca would have approved of helping Emma. She might have even insisted on it. By noon, Samuel had the room ready. Clean sheets on the bed, fresh towels in the adjoining bathroom, and a warm quilt Mary had sewn years ago spread over the covers. He'd also stocked the kitchen with foods that would appeal to a child: fresh bread, jam, milk, eggs, and the makings for hot chocolate, just in case. The afternoon passed slowly. Samuel tried to keep busy with farm chores, but he found himself constantly glancing toward the road, hoping to catch a glimpse of Emma. As the sun began to set, he felt his anxiety increasing. The temperature was dropping again, and if Emma was outside in those thin clothes. At 7 p.m., Samuel made another decision. He hitched Moses to his wagon and set out toward the Henderson place, telling himself he was just making sure Emma had gotten the wood inside safely. But as he approached the property, he heard something that made his blood turn to ice. Shouting. A man's voice, raised in anger, coming from inside the house. "Worthless little brat, I give you one simple job, and you can't even do that right." Samuel pulled his wagon to a stop and listened. He could hear Dale's voice clearly now, along with what sounded like furniture being thrown around. "I'm sorry, Uncle Dale," came Emma's small voice. "I tried my best. Your best isn't good enough." Dale roared. "Do you have any idea how much money I've wasted on you? Food, clothes, keeping this roof over your head? And this is how you repay me." The sound of a slap echoed across the night air, followed by a cry of pain that pierced Samuel's heart like a dagger. That was enough. Samuel jumped from his wagon and strode toward the house, his usual caution abandoned. He'd listened to enough. Through the broken window, he could see into the main room. Dale was standing over Emma, who was cowering on the floor, holding her cheek. The room was a disaster. Overturned furniture, scattered belongings, and empty bottles that explained a lot about Dale's behavior. "You're going to learn some respect," Dale was saying, reaching for his belt buckle. "I should have done this a long time ago." Samuel didn't hesitate. He pounded on the front door with enough force to rattle the frame. "Open up," he called out. The shouting inside stopped abruptly. Samuel could hear whispered voices, then footsteps approaching the door. "Who's there?" Dale called out, his voice noticeably calmer, but still slurred. Samuel Miller, I live down the road. I heard shouting and wanted to make sure everything was all right. There was a long pause. Samuel could picture Dale trying to decide how to handle the situation. Everything's fine, Dale finally called back. Just had the radio up too loud, nothing to worry about. I'd feel better if I could see that for myself, Samuel said firmly. It's my Christian duty to check on my neighbors. Another pause, then the sound of locks being undone. The door opened just wide enough for Dale to stick his head out. Even in the dim porch light, Samuel could see that the man was clearly intoxicated. See? Everything's fine, Dale said, attempting a smile. Thanks for checking, but we're good here. Samuel could see past Dale into the room, where Emma was still crouched on the floor. Even from a distance, he could see the red mark on her cheek. Actually, I'd like to speak with Emma for a moment, Samuel said. I believe she dropped something on the road earlier, and I wanted to return it to her. Dale's eyes narrowed. What kind of something? Samuel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden cross he'd been carrying, a gift from Rebecca years ago. I found it near where she was walking. It was a lie, but a necessary one. Dale looked at the cross, then back at Samuel. Emma doesn't own anything like that, Dale said suspiciously. Uncle Dale. Emma's voice came from behind him, small and hopeful. That's Mama's cross. I thought I'd lost it. Samuel saw Emma catch on to what he was doing. Smart girl. Dale turned to look at her, and in that moment of distraction, Samuel stepped closer to the door. Well then, Samuel said, I'm glad I could return it. Emma, why don't you come get it? Dale started to object, but Emma was already moving toward the door. As she approached, Samuel could see that the red mark on her cheek was already darkening into a bruise. Her lower lip was split, and there were fresh scratches on her arms. Here you go, Samuel said gently, pressing the cross into her palm. As he did, he whispered, Tonight, when he's asleep. Emma's eyes widened slightly, but she nodded almost imperceptibly. Thank you, she said aloud, clutching the cross. This was Mama's. I was so worried I'd lost it forever. Well, now you have it back, Samuel said. He looked directly at Dale. I hope you both have a peaceful evening. The warning in his tone was unmistakable. Dale's jaw tightened, but with Samuel watching, he couldn't do much more than nod curtly. Of course. Thank you for returning Emma's property. Samuel tipped his hat to Emma, giving her one more meaningful look, then returned to his wagon. As he drove away, he could hear Dale's voice rising again, but this time it was more controlled. He knew now that someone was paying attention. Samuel drove home slowly, his mind racing. He'd bought Emma some time, but not much. Dale would be more careful now, but he'd also be angrier, and drunk men were unpredictable. Back at his farmhouse, Samuel left every light on and sat by the kitchen window that faced toward the Henderson place. He'd told Emma to come when Dale was asleep, but that could be hours away. At 11 p.m. he saw a small figure moving across his fields. Samuel rushed to his front door and opened it wide, warm light spilling out into the cold night. Emma was running toward his house, clutching a small bundle of belongings, her oversized boots making her stumble in the darkness. When she reached his porch, she was sobbing and shaking from both cold and fear. He said he was going to beat me, she gasped, between sobs. He said since you'd already seen me with bruises, what was one more? He said he was tired of being nice to me. Samuel gently guided her inside, his heart breaking at the terror in her voice. You're safe now, he said softly, closing and locking the door behind her. He can't hurt you here. Emma stood in his warm kitchen, dripping wet from the frost and dew, still clutching her small bundle. She looked around at the clean, comfortable space, as if she'd never seen anything like it. Are you really going to let me stay? She whispered. As long as you need to, Samuel promised. Let's get you warm and fed, and then we'll figure out what comes next. As he helped Emma out of her wet coat and boots, Samuel realized he was no longer just offering temporary shelter. He was taking responsibility for a child's life, well-being, and future. And for the first time in 3 years, that responsibility didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a second chance. "Emma," he said as he hung her coat by the fire to dry, "you don't have to be afraid anymore." She looked up at him with those deep brown eyes, so much like Rebecca's, and for the first time since he'd met her, she smiled. "I know," she whispered. "I can feel it." Outside, the wind howled around the farmhouse, but inside, Samuel Miller was no longer alone. And neither was Emma. They were family now, even if they didn't quite realize it yet. Emma woke to the smell of bacon and fresh biscuits, a sensation so foreign to her that for a moment she thought she was dreaming. Sunlight was streaming through clean windows covered with cheerful yellow curtains, and she was lying in the softest bed she could remember ever sleeping in. For a panicked second, she couldn't remember where she was. Then the events of the previous night came flooding back. Uncle Dale's rage, the terrifying sound of his belt buckle, Samuel's unexpected arrival, and her desperate midnight run across the frost-covered fields. She was safe. She was at Samuel's house. Emma sat up carefully, wincing as her bruised ribs protested the movement. Looking around the room in daylight, she was amazed by what she saw. This had clearly been a little girl's room once. There were books on shelves, a beautiful quilt with tiny flowers sewn into the pattern, and on the dresser, a photograph of a man and woman with a dark-haired girl about Emma's age. The little girl in the photo was laughing, her arms wrapped around the neck of a large farm dog. The man was Samuel, though younger and without the sadness that now seemed to live in his eyes. The woman was pretty, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Emma realized this must be Samuel's family, the family he'd lost. The reason for the deep sorrow she'd sensed in him from their first meeting. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Emma, are you awake?" Samuel's voice was gentle, careful not to startle her. "Yes, sir," she called back, quickly smoothing down her hair and trying to make herself presentable. "Breakfast is ready when you are. No hurry. Take your time." Emma heard his footsteps retreat down the hallway. She climbed out of bed, marveling again at how comfortable it was, and went to the window. From here she could see across Samuel's property neat fields, a well-maintained barn, chickens pecking around a clean coop, and in the distance the county road where she'd first encountered this kind man who'd changed her life. In the other direction she could just make out the Henderson place. From this distance it looked even more derelict than she'd realized. Had she really been living in that falling-down house, convinced it was the best she could hope for? Emma dressed quickly in her cleanest dress, which wasn't saying much, and made her way downstairs. The kitchen was warm and bright, with a fire crackling in the hearth, and morning sunlight streaming through spotless windows. Samuel was standing at the stove, wearing a simple white shirt and dark pants, his beard neatly trimmed. "Good morning," he said, turning to smile at her. "I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in months," Emma admitted. "Thank you, Mr. Miller." "Samuel," he corrected gently. "Just Samuel. And you don't need to thank me. We're helping each other now." He gestured to the table, which was set with 2 plates loaded with more food than Emma usually saw in a week. Bacon, eggs, fresh biscuits with butter and jam, and a glass of milk so white and creamy it made her mouth water. "This is too much," Emma said, overwhelmed. "I can't eat all this." "Eat what you can," Samuel said, settling into his own chair. "The rest will keep." As they ate, or rather as Samuel ate, and Emma tried not to devour everything in sight, despite her hunger, Samuel asked gentle questions about her life. Where had she gone to school? What subjects did she like? What did she like to do for fun? Emma found herself talking more than she had in months. She told him about her mother, who had taught her to read and write before she'd gotten too sick to continue. Emma's education. She talked about how much she'd loved helping in their small garden and how she missed having books to read. "Mama always said education was the most important thing," Emma said, taking a careful sip of milk. "She said it was the one thing nobody could ever take away from you." "Your mama was a wise woman," Samuel said. What happened to your schooling after she passed? Emma's expression darkened. Uncle Dale said school was a waste of time for girls. He said I needed to focus on being useful around the house instead of filling my head with nonsense. Samuel's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice calm. What do you think about that? I think Mama was right, Emma said quietly, then looked up at Samuel with sudden worry. Is that wrong? Should I not disagree with Uncle Dale? Emma, Samuel said firmly, you should never be afraid to have your own thoughts and opinions. Your mama raised you to value learning, and that's a gift you should treasure. They finished breakfast in comfortable silence. Then Samuel showed Emma around the farmhouse. It was larger than she'd expected, with a cozy sitting room, a well-stocked library that made her eyes light up, and a large kitchen that was clearly the heart of the home. This was my wife Mary's favorite room, Samuel said as they stood in the kitchen. She loved to cook and bake, always said the kitchen was where a family really lived. What happened to her? Emma asked softly. If you don't mind me asking. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window toward his fields. She died of grief, he said finally. We lost our daughter Rebecca in an accident 3 years ago, and Mary just couldn't find a way to keep living without her. Emma felt tears prick her eyes. I'm sorry, that must have been terrible. It was, Samuel admitted. I've been living here alone ever since, telling myself I was fine, that I didn't need anyone. But seeing you yesterday, seeing how afraid you were, he turned to look at her. It reminded me that sometimes we all need someone to care about. Uncle Dale used to say that caring about people just made you weak, Emma said. Your uncle was wrong about a lot of things, Samuel replied. Caring about others is what makes us human. It's what gives life meaning. They spent the rest of the morning with Samuel showing Emma around the farm. She was fascinated by everything. The chickens, the vegetable garden, the workshop where Samuel built and repaired farm equipment. Her questions were thoughtful and intelligent, and Samuel found himself seeing his property through her curious eyes. Could I help with some of this? Emma asked as they watched the chickens pecking around their coop. I mean, I know I'm not very strong, but I could gather eggs or feed them or... Emma, Samuel interrupted gently. You don't have to earn your place here. You're not my hired help. Then what am I? The question came out small and uncertain. Samuel knelt down to her eye level. You're a little girl who deserves to be safe and cared for. You're someone who should be learning and growing and discovering what she wants to become. He paused, struggling with emotions he hadn't expected. You're welcome here for as long as you want to stay. Emma stared at him with those deep brown eyes that reminded him so much of Rebecca. What if Uncle Dale comes looking for me? Then we'll deal with that when it happens, Samuel said. But Emma, I need you to understand something. What your uncle was doing to you, the hitting, the yelling, making you drag heavy wood, that's not how family treats family. That's not love. But he said he was taking care of me. Taking care of someone means keeping them safe and helping them grow, Samuel said firmly. It means making sure they have enough to eat and warm clothes to wear. It means encouraging them to learn and dream and become the best version of themselves. What your uncle was doing was called abuse, Emma, and it's never acceptable, no matter what excuses someone gives. Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing this. So when you take care of me, it's different, very different, Samuel assured her. When I take care of you, it's because I want you to be happy and healthy and safe. Because every child deserves those things. Even me. The question broke Samuel's heart. Especially you. They were interrupted by the sound of a horse and buggy coming up the drive. Samuel tensed, wondering if somehow Dale had tracked Emma here. But as the buggy drew closer, he recognized his neighbor Isaac Stoltzfus. Wait here, Samuel told Emma, but she was already backing toward the house, fear clear on her face. Isaac was a good man, one of the church elders, but his arrival meant that Samuel was about to face questions he wasn't sure he was ready to answer. Samuel, Isaac called out as he climbed down from his buggy. Good to see you. I was just coming by to be stopped mid-sentence as he caught sight of Emma hovering near the front door. Who's the child? Samuel felt Emma's eyes on him, waiting to see how he would handle this first test of his commitment to protect her. Her name is Emma, Samuel said simply. She's staying with me for a while. Isaac's eyebrows rose. Staying with you? Samuel, what's going on here? Samuel glanced back at Emma, who looked ready to bolt at the first sign of trouble. He made a decision that would change both their lives forever. She's family, Samuel said firmly. She needed a home, and I needed her. The words surprised even Samuel with their truth. In just one night, this frightened little girl had brought something back to life in his empty house. She'd reminded him what it felt like to have purpose beyond just surviving each day. Isaac looked confused. Family. Samuel, I don't understand. Where did she come from? Who are her people? It's complicated, Samuel said, but she belongs here now. Isaac studied Emma for a moment, taking in her bruised face and thin frame. Understanding dawned in his eyes. He'd seen enough in his years as an elder to recognize the signs of an abused child. I see, he said quietly. Well then, I suppose I should introduce myself properly. He walked over to Emma, who shrank back against the door. Hello, Emma. I'm Isaac Stoltzfus. I live on the next farm over. Emma looked to Samuel for guidance. He nodded encouragingly. Hello, sir, she whispered. Samuel, Isaac said, turning back to his friend. We should talk. Samuel knew this conversation was inevitable. Word would spread quickly across their close-knit community that he was harboring a strange child. There would be questions, concerns, and quite possibly official intervention. But looking at Emma, seeing the hope and trust beginning to bloom in her eyes, Samuel knew he'd made the right choice. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Yes, Samuel said. I suppose we should. Emma, why don't you go inside and look through those books in the library? Samuel suggested gently. Isaac and I need to have a grown-up conversation. Emma nodded, but Samuel could see the fear returning to her eyes. She was terrified that this man's arrival meant she'd have to leave the first safe place she'd known in months. I'll be right here, Samuel assured her. I'm not going anywhere, and neither are you. Only after Emma had disappeared into the house did Isaac speak again. Samuel, what have you gotten yourself into? The two men walked toward the barn, away from the house where Emma might overhear. Isaac had known Samuel since they were boys, and he could read the determination in his friend's posture. I've gotten myself into doing what's right, Samuel said firmly. And what exactly does that mean? Isaac asked, where did this child come from? Why is her face bruised? And why are you telling me she's family when I know for a fact you have no living relatives? Samuel took a deep breath. He'd known this moment would come, but he'd hoped for more time to figure out how to handle it. She was being abused, Isaac, by a man who's supposed to be her guardian. I found her yesterday, trying to drag heavy pieces of firewood down the county road. She could barely lift them, but she was terrified of going home without them. Isaac's expression grew more serious. Abused how? Look at her face. Look at how thin she is. Look at the fear in her eyes when anyone speaks too loudly. Samuel's voice was rising with barely controlled anger. That man, her uncle, was beating her, starving her, making her do work that grown men would struggle with. Samuel, if what you're saying is true, then this is a matter for the authorities. We have protocols. Protocols. Samuel turned to face his friend fully. Isaac, that little girl begged me not to contact the authorities. She's been told that if anyone finds out about her situation, she'll be taken away and put in some terrible institution. She's more afraid of that than she is of being beaten. Isaac was quiet for a moment, clearly wrestling with the situation. Where is she supposed to be living? Who is this uncle? The old Henderson place. Dale something. I never got his last name. The man's a drunk, Isaac. I saw him last night ready to take his belt to a 10-year-old girl because she'd disappointed him. The Henderson place. Isaac's eyes widened. Samuel, that house isn't fit for animals. let alone a child. It's been falling apart for years. Exactly. And somehow this little girl has been surviving there, trying to take care of a man who should have been taking care of her. Isaac walked to the barn door and leaned against it, clearly struggling with what he'd heard. Samuel, I understand your compassion. But you can't just take someone else's child, no matter how good your intentions are. Someone else's child. Samuel's voice was sharp. Isaac, that man doesn't want her. He told her she was a burden, that caring for her was a waste of his time and money. He was hurting her. If I hadn't intervened last night, Samuel's voice trailed off as he thought about what might have happened. But legally that man has the right to beat a child as long as he doesn't kill her. Samuel asked. Legally, a 10-year-old girl should be dragging firewood. She can't lift because a grown man is too drunk and lazy to do it himself. Isaac held up his hands. That's not what I'm saying, and you know it. I'm saying there are proper channels, proper ways to handle these situations. And how long do those proper channels take? Samuel asked. Days, weeks, month? And what happens to Emma while we're following proper channels? She goes back to that house, back to that man, and we hope he doesn't hurt her too badly while we're filling out paperwork. The two men stood in tense silence for a moment. Finally, Isaac spoke. What are you proposing, Samuel? That you just keep her here indefinitely? What about school? What about legal guardianship? What about her uncle? Do you think he's just going to let her disappear? Samuel had been wrestling with these same questions all morning. I don't have all the answers yet, he admitted. But I know she's safe here. I know she's being fed and cared for properly for the first time in months. And I know that she's already more of a family to me than I've had since Mary and Rebecca died. Isaac's expression softened at the mention of Samuel's late wife and daughter. Samuel, I understand that you're lonely. I understand that this child reminds you of Rebecca, but you can't replace your daughter. I'm not trying to replace anyone. Samuel's voice cracked with emotion. Isaac, for 3 years I've been dead inside, going through the motions, surviving but not really living. Yesterday, when I saw Emma struggling with that wood, something woke up in me that I thought was gone forever. When I see her smile, when I watch her discover something new, when I know she's safe and warm in Rebecca's old room, for the first time since the accident, I feel like I have a purpose again. Isaac studied his friend's face, seeing something there he hadn't seen in years. Hope. And what does Emma want? Isaac asked quietly. Have you asked her what she wants? Before Samuel could answer, they heard the sound of another horse approaching. Both men turned to see Dale riding up the drive on an old horse that looked as neglected as everything else in his care. Samuel felt his blood pressure. Stay with Emma, he told Isaac tersely, then strode toward the approaching man. Dale dismounted unsteadily, clearly still feeling the effects of his drinking from the night before. When he saw Samuel, his face twisted into an ugly expression. Where is she? Dale demanded without preamble. Where is who? Samuel asked, though he positioned himself between Dale and the house. Don't play games with me, Miller. I know you have Emma. She ran off last night, and neighbors said they saw her heading this direction. Emma is no longer your concern, Samuel said firmly. Dale's eyes narrowed. The hell she isn't. That girl is my responsibility. My sister left her to me, and I'll be damned if I'm going to let some Amish do-gooder interfere with family business. Family business. Samuel's voice was dangerously quiet. Is that what you call hitting a child? Starving her? Making her do work that would challenge a grown man? How I discipline my niece is none of your damn business, Dale snarled. Now hand her over, or I'll get the sheriff involved. Go ahead, Samuel said. Call the sheriff. I'm sure he'd be very interested in seeing the bruises on Emma's face and hearing about the conditions she's been living in. Dale took a step back, clearly not having expected Samuel to call his bluff. You can't just steal someone's kid. I didn't steal anyone. Emma came here of her own free will because she was afraid for her safety. She's 10 years old. She doesn't get to make decisions about where she lives. You're right, Samuel said, which is why the adults in her life should be making decisions based on what's best for her. And what's best for Emma is being somewhere safe, somewhere she's cared for properly. From behind Samuel, Isaac spoke up. Perhaps we should all take a step back and think about what's truly best for the child. Dale spun around, noticing Isaac for the first time. Who the hell are you, Isaac Stoltzfus? I'm an elder in the church community here. Isaac's voice was calm but carried unmistakable authority. And I'm wondering, Mr. Henderson, Dale Henderson. Mr. Henderson, I'm wondering if you're truly prepared to care for a young child. From what I understand, your living situation is challenging. Dale's face reddened. My living situation is fine, and it's none of your business anyway. Actually, it is our business, Isaac said firmly. When a child's welfare is at stake, it becomes everyone's business. Now, would you be willing to allow our community to help assess what would be best for Emma? I don't need your help, and I don't need your assessment, Dale snapped. I need my niece back so she can do her chores and earn her keep. The way Dale phrased it, talking about Emma earning her keep, made both Samuel and Isaac exchange glances. This man saw Emma as free labor, not as a child to be nurtured and protected. Mr. Henderson, Isaac said carefully. What exactly are Emma's chores? Whatever needs doing, Dale said. Cleaning, cooking, hauling wood, fetching water. Girls got to learn to be useful. She's 10 years old, Samuel said through gritted teeth. So, I was working when I was 10. Builds character. Hauling firewood builds character, Isaac asked. Wood so heavy that grown men would struggle with it. Dale shifted uncomfortably. She needs to toughen up. World's a hard place. Miss Henderson, Isaac said, his voice taking on the tone he used when delivering sermons. Caring for a child means providing for their needs, ensuring their safety, and helping them grow into healthy, capable adults. It does not mean using them as unpaid labor. His eyes took in Dale's disheveled appearance and the smell of alcohol that clung to him, exposing them to environments that could harm their development. Are you saying I can't take care of my own family? Dale's voice was rising again. I'm saying that perhaps Emma would benefit from staying here while we sort out what's truly best for her, Isaac replied diplomatically. Dale looked back and forth between the two men, clearly realizing he was outnumbered. This isn't over, he said finally. That girl belongs with me, and I'll get her back one way or another. With that threat hanging in the air, Dale mounted his horse and rode away, leaving Samuel and Isaac standing in tense silence. Well, Isaac said finally, that settles one thing. What's that? That man has no business caring for a child. Isaac turned to Samuel. I'm not saying I agree with how you've handled this, but I can see why you felt you had to act. Samuel felt a surge of relief. Having Isaac's understanding, if not his full approval, meant everything. So what do we do now? Samuel asked. Isaac was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing their options. Now we pray for wisdom, he said finally, and we figure out how to protect that little girl, while staying within the bounds of both law and conscience. And if those two things conflict, Isaac looked toward the house, where Emma was waiting to learn her fate. Then we choose conscience, he said quietly. Some things matter more than following rules. As they walked back toward the house, Samuel realized that his quiet life had just become infinitely more complicated. But looking through the window and seeing Emma curled up in a chair with one of Rebecca's old books, he knew he'd make the same choice again. Some battles were worth fighting, and Emma was definitely worth fighting for. Emma was pretending to read when Samuel and Isaac returned to the house, but Samuel could see the tension in her small shoulders. She'd probably heard raised voices and was terrified that her brief taste of safety was about to end. Emma, Samuel said gently, settling into the chair across from her. Everything's all right. You're staying here. Her relief was so visible that it made Samuel's chest tighten. No child should have to live with that level of fear and uncertainty. Was that Uncle Dave? She asked in a small voice. Yes, but he's gone now, Samuel assured her. And Isaac here would like to get to know you better. Isaac pulled up another chair, moving slowly so as not to frighten her. Emma, Samuel tells me you like to read. She nodded shyly, holding up the book she'd been looking at. It was one of Rebecca's favorites, a collection of fairy tales with beautiful illustrations. This was my daughter's book, Samuel said softly. She loved that story about the princess who saved the kingdom with her kindness. I remember that story, Isaac said with a gentle smile. Rebecca used to act it out for the other children at church gatherings. She had quite the imagination. Emma looked between the two men. What happened to her? To Rebecca? Samuel felt the familiar pain in his chest, but this time it was accompanied by something else, a desire to share Rebecca's memory rather than hide from it. She was helping me repair our barn roof, Samuel said. The ladder broke, and she fell. She was very brave right up until the end. She sounds wonderful, Emma said quietly. She was, Samuel agreed. She would have liked you very much. You have the same kind spirit she did. Over the next hour, Isaac gently asked Emma questions about her life, where she'd come from, what had happened to her mother, how long she'd been with Dale. As her story unfolded, Isaac's expression grew increasingly troubled. Emma's mother, Sarah, had been a young woman who'd fallen in love with the wrong man. When he left her pregnant and alone, she'd struggled to raise Emma by herself, working whatever jobs she could find. They'd moved frequently, never staying anywhere long enough to put down real roots. When Sarah got sick the previous spring, she'd written to her brother Dale, her only living relative, asking for help. Dale had come, but only after Sarah had died, and only because he'd heard there might be some money or property involved. When he discovered that Sarah had died penniless, with only a sick child to show for her life, his resentment had been immediate and obvious. He said I was a burden from the start, Emma told them, her voice matter-of-fact in the way children spoke about trauma they'd learned to accept. He said if it wasn't for me, Mama might have found a husband and had a better life. Isaac and Samuel exchanged glances over her head. Both men had seen enough of life to recognize the psychological damage such words could inflict on a child. Emma, Isaac said carefully, do you understand that none of your mother's struggles were your fault? She shrugged. Uncle Dale says, your uncle is wrong, Samuel interrupted firmly. Whatever difficulties your mother faced, they weren't because of you. Children are blessings, not burdens. But I cost money, food and clothes and... Emma, listen to me, Samuel said, kneeling down beside her chair. Every child costs money. Every child needs food and clothes and care. That's what adults are supposed to provide. It's not something you should feel guilty about. Isaac watched this exchange with growing understanding. Samuel wasn't just offering Emma shelter. He was actively working to undo months of psychological damage. The man who'd been frozen in grief for 3 years was coming back to life as he fought for this little girl's well-being. Samuel, Isaac said quietly, might I speak with you privately for a moment? They stepped into the kitchen, leaving Emma absorbed in her book. I've made my decision, Isaac said without preamble. Samuel tensed, preparing for the worst. I'm going to help you, Isaac continued. That child has been through enough trauma. If we force her back into that situation, while we navigate bureaucracy and legal procedures, we could be doing irreparable harm. Samuel felt a surge of gratitude so strong it nearly overwhelmed him. Isaac held up a hand. We need to do this properly. We can't just pretend Emma appeared out of nowhere. We need to document what's been happening to her, establish legal guardianship, and ensure that Dale can't simply take her back whenever he chooses. How do we do that? Carefully, Isaac said. I know a family lawyer in town, an Englishman, but a good one. He's helped our community before with custody issues and guardianship matters. I think we should speak with him. Samuel nodded. What about the church? The elders? I'll speak with them, Isaac promised. I'll explain the situation and ask for their support. Most of them are parents and grandparents themselves. They'll understand why we had to act quickly. And if they don't approve, Isaac smiled grimly, then they'll have to explain to God why they think following rules is more important than protecting children. They returned to the living room to find Emma had fallen asleep in her chair, the book still open in her lap. The bruise on her cheek was dark purple now, and her thin wrists looked fragile as bird bones. She's exhausted, Samuel observed quietly. I don't think she's slept properly in months. Trauma takes a toll, Isaac agreed. But children are resilient. With proper care and love, she'll heal. Samuel gently lifted Emma from the chair, marveling at how light she was. She stirred slightly but didn't wake, instinctively curling against his chest the way Rebecca used to do when she was small. "I'll put her down for a proper nap," Samuel said. "All this stress and change, she needs rest more than anything." As he carried Emma upstairs, Samuel felt something shift inside his chest. For 3 years, he'd avoided this hallway, avoided Rebecca's room, avoided any reminder of what it felt like to care for a child. Now, tucking Emma under the quilt Mary had sewn years ago, he realized he wasn't just helping a child in need. He was learning how to live again. When he returned downstairs, Isaac was standing by the window, looking out toward the field. "Samuel, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Of course. Is this about Emma, or is this about Rebecca?" Samuel was quiet for a long moment, considering the question seriously. "Both," he admitted finally. "When I first saw Emma, she reminded me so much of Rebecca that it took my breath away. And yes, part of me wonders if this is God's way of giving me a second chance to protect a child. And the other part sees a little girl who needs someone to fight for her," Samuel said. "Someone who will put her well-being above convenience, above social expectations, above everything else. Emma deserves that, regardless of whether she reminds me of my daughter." Isaac nodded slowly. "That's what I needed to hear. Because if you were only trying to replace Rebecca, you'd be doing Emma a disservice. She needs to be loved for who she is, not as a substitute for someone else." "I understand that," Samuel said. "Emma is not Rebecca. She's her own person, with her own needs and her own spirit. But Isaac, when I see her laugh, when I watch her discover something new, when I know she's safe and warm." His voice broke slightly. "For the first time in 3 years, I feel like I have something to live for again." Isaac clasped his friend's shoulder. "Then we'd better make sure we do this right." They spent the next hour planning their strategy. Isaac would speak with the lawyer and begin the process of documenting Emma's situation and establishing legal guardianship. Samuel would focus on helping Emma adjust to her new life and beginning to undo the psychological damage Dale had inflicted. "There's one more thing," Isaac said as he prepared to leave. "Emma will need to start school again. She's clearly intelligent, and she's missed months of education." Samuel nodded. "She mentioned that her mother had been teaching her to read and write. I'd like to continue that, maybe expand it to include arithmetic and other subjects." "You're thinking of homeschooling her?" "For now, yes. Until she's more comfortable, more confident. The local school might be overwhelming after everything she's been through." Isaac considered this. "That's probably wise. And Samuel, you might want to think about having Dr. Matthews examine her. Make sure she hasn't suffered any serious injuries we can't see." The thought of Emma being hurt in ways that weren't immediately visible made Samuel's stomach turn, but he knew Isaac was right. "I'll arrange it," he promised. After Isaac left, Samuel found himself standing in his kitchen, looking around at the space that had felt so empty for so long. Already it felt different with Emma here. There was a child's coat hanging by the door, a small pair of boots drying by the fire, and the lingering scent of the soap she'd used to wash her hands before lunch. Upstairs he could hear Emma stirring from her nap. In a few minutes she'd come downstairs, probably shy and uncertain about what this new life would bring. Samuel would reassure her, help her feel safe, and continue the slow process of earning her trust. For the first time since the accident that had taken his family, Samuel Miller had something to look forward to. He had someone to protect, someone to nurture, someone to love. He had Emma, and she had him. It wasn't the family either of them had started with, but it was the family they'd chosen. And sometimes, chosen families were the strongest ones of all. As Emma's footsteps sounded on the stairs, Samuel smiled and went to greet her, ready to begin the next chapter of both their lives. A chapter filled with healing, hope, and the kind of love that could mend even the most broken hearts. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows of the Miller farmhouse, illuminating a scene that would have been unimaginable half a year earlier. Emma sat at the kitchen table, her dark hair neatly braided, wearing a simple blue dress that Mary had sewn for Rebecca years ago, but that fit Emma perfectly after some careful alterations by the church women. She was bent over a slate board, carefully working through arithmetic problems that Samuel had given her, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration, the same way Rebecca's used to do. The bruises had long since faded from her face, replaced by the healthy glow of a well-fed, well-loved child. She'd grown nearly 2 inches and gained 15 pounds, transforming from the skeletal, frightened wife Samuel had first encountered into a vibrant, curious girl. "Samuel," Emma called out, not looking up from her work, "if Mrs. Yoder has 36 apples, and she wants to divide them equally among 8 families, how many apples does each family get, and how many are left over?" Samuel smiled as he flipped pancakes at the stove. Emma's hunger for learning had been one of the most beautiful things to witness over the past months. Once she'd realized that education was truly a gift rather than a waste of time, she'd thrown herself into every lesson with passionate intensity. "Well," Samuel said thoughtfully, "what do you think? You know how to divide." Emma worked quietly for a moment, then looked up with triumph. "4 apples each, with 4 left over." "Excellent," Samuel said, sliding a stack of golden pancakes onto her plate. "And what might Mrs. Yoder do with those 4 extra apples?" "Save them for pie," Emma suggested, then grinned. "Or give them to the families with the most children." Samuel's heart swelled with pride, not just at her mathematical skills, but at the compassion that always seemed to guide her thinking. Even after everything she'd been through, Emma's first instinct was still to think about how to help others. The legal battle had been easier than expected. Dale had disappeared shortly after their confrontation, apparently deciding that fighting for custody of a child he'd never wanted wasn't worth the effort, especially when Isaac's lawyer had made it clear that charges of child abuse and neglect were being seriously considered. Samuel had been granted temporary guardianship within a month, and the permanent adoption papers were already being processed. Dr. Matthews had found evidence of old injuries, healed fractures in Emma's ribs and wrists that spoke to months of rough treatment, but nothing that wouldn't heal completely with proper care and nutrition. More importantly, he'd found a spirit that, while wounded, was remarkably intact. The church community had rallied around them in ways that still amazed Samuel. The women had sewn Emma new clothes, the men had helped Samuel convert his workshop into a proper schoolroom, and the children had gradually welcomed Emma into their games and activities. It hadn't been without challenges. Emma had struggled with nightmares and anxiety for months, but slowly, steadily, she was learning to trust in her safety and security. "Samuel?" Emma's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." Emma set down her pencil and looked at him with those serious brown eyes. "Next week, when the adoption is final, will I really be Emma Miller?" Samuel's throat tightened with emotion. They'd talked about this many times, but he could see that Emma still struggled to believe it was real. "Yes," he said simply. "You'll officially be my daughter, and I'll officially be your father. And nobody can take me away?" "Nobody," Samuel promised firmly. "You're my family now, Emma. Forever." Emma nodded solemnly, then surprised him with a sudden smile. "Good, because I have something I want to give you." She jumped up from the table and ran upstairs, leaving Samuel puzzled. A few minutes later, she returned carrying a small wrapped package. "I've been working on this with Mrs. Stoltzfus," Emma said, suddenly shy. "She helped me with the hard parts, but I did most of it myself." Samuel unwrapped the package carefully, then felt his breath catch. Inside was a small, exquisitely sewn sampler, the kind young Amish girls traditionally made to practice their needlework. But this one was special. Instead of the usual Bible verse or decorative pattern, Emma had stitched a simple message in careful, even letters. "For Samuel, who taught me that love makes families, not blood. Thank you for choosing me. Love, your daughter Emma." Samuel stared at the sampler, unable to speak for a moment. When he finally looked up, Emma was watching him anxiously. "Do you like it?" she asked uncertainly. Samuel set the sampler carefully on the table and knelt down, opening his arms. Emma flew into them, and he held her tight, this miracle child who had brought his heart back to life. "Emma," he whispered into her hair, "this is the most beautiful gift anyone has ever given me." "Really? Really? And do you know why?" She pulled back to look at him, curious. "Because it shows me that you understand something very important," Samuel said. "You understand that love, real love, isn't about sharing blood or having the same last name. It's about choosing to care for each other, no matter what." Emma nodded seriously. "Like how you chose to help me even though you didn't know me, and like how you chose to trust me even though you'd been hurt by adults before," Samuel added. They might have stayed like that longer, but the sound of horses and buggies coming up the drive interrupted the moment. Through the window, Samuel could see what looked like half the church community arriving. "What's all this?" Emma asked, peering out the window. Samuel grinned. "I believe our friends have come to help us celebrate something." The next hour was a whirlwind of activity as the farmhouse filled with neighbors and friends. The women had brought food, mountains of it, while the men set up tables and chairs in the yard. The children ran around playing games, and Emma found herself swept up in their excitement. Isaac appeared at Samuel's elbow as they watched the festivities from the porch. "Thought you two might like a proper celebration before the official adoption ceremony next week," Isaac said with a smile. "You organized all this?" "The community organized it," Isaac corrected. "We all wanted Emma to know how welcome she is here." Samuel watched as Emma played tag with a group of children, her laughter ringing out across the yard. 6 months ago, the sound of children playing would have brought him nothing but pain. Now it filled him with joy. "She's brought you back to life," Isaac observed quietly. "She's brought us both back to life," Samuel corrected. "For a while there, I forgot that healing was possible." Emma reminded me. As the afternoon wore on, Samuel found himself surrounded by friends, offering congratulations and support. But it was Emma's happiness that meant the most to him. She was glowing with the attention and acceptance, finally understanding what it meant to be part of a community that cared about her well-being. As the sun began to set and the guests started to head home, Emma found Samuel sitting on the porch steps. "That was the best day ever," she said, settling down beside him. "Was it?" "Well," Emma considered carefully, "maybe the second best day ever." "What was the first?" Emma leaned against his arm. "The day you found me on the road. The day you decided to help me." Samuel felt tears prick his eyes. "You know what, Emma? I think that was my best day too." "Really?" "Because that was the day I learned that sometimes the most broken hearts can heal each other." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the last of the buggies disappear down the road. Finally, Emma spoke again. "Samuel, can I tell you a secret?" "Of course. Sometimes I pretend that Mama and Rebecca are watching us from heaven. And I think they're happy that we found each other." Samuel's voice was thick with emotion when he replied, "I think you're right, sweetheart. I think they're very happy." As they went inside together, Samuel reflected on the miracle of the past 6 months. He'd started with a simple act of kindness, helping a child with heavy wood, and it had transformed both their lives completely. Emma had taught him that love didn't end with death, it simply found new ways to express itself. She'd shown him that healing was possible, that joy could return, and that families could be built from choice and commitment just as surely as from blood and biology. And he'd given her something just as precious, the knowledge that she was worthy of love, protection and care, that she deserved to dream big dreams and reach for impossible goals, that she was not a burden, but a blessing. Later that night, as Samuel tucked Emma into bed in Rebecca's old room, which had truly become Emma's room now, she looked up at him with sleepy contentment. "Samuel, yes, sweetheart. Thank you for seeing me that day, really seeing me." Samuel smoothed her hair back from her forehead. "Thank you for letting me help. Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for teaching me how to love again. Will you always love me, even when I make mistakes or disappoint you?" "Always," Samuel promised. "That's what families do. They love each other through everything." "Even if I'm not really your daughter," Samuel smiled. "Emma, love makes you my daughter more than any piece of paper ever could. You are mine, and I am yours, and nothing will ever change that." As Emma drifted off to sleep, Samuel stood in the doorway for a moment, marveling at how completely his life had changed. 6 months ago, he'd been a broken man, existing but not really living. Now he was a father again, with purpose and hope, and a future full of possibility. Sometimes the most beautiful stories began with the darkest moments. Sometimes the greatest blessings came disguised as burden. And sometimes, when a lonely man saw a little girl struggling with wood too heavy for her to carry, the simple act of offering help could heal 2 broken hearts and create a family stronger than blood. Samuel Miller and Emma Miller, soon to be officially father and daughter, had found their way home to each other. And in a world that could be harsh and unforgiving, they had created a pocket of pure love, acceptance, and joy. It was more than either of them had dared to hope for. It was everything they'd never known they needed. It was the miracle of choosing to love.